On this episode of the NESN Patriots podcast, we recap the best and worst of Patriots training camp, including the most impressive players we saw and those that may be fighting to make the final roster. Hello and welcome back to the NESN Patriots podcast. My name is Zach Cox, joined as always by Dakota Randall. Patriots training camp is complete. It is over. They held their 18th and final open practice yesterday, Wednesday. Originally, that was supposed to happen down in Nashville, but the Patriots ended up canceling their joint practices with the Titans, practiced at home for the final few days of the preseason. Now they'll fly down to Tennessee for their final preseason game on Friday night. We're going to get into everything that we've seen this summer from the Patriots. Going to give you some winners, some losers, some standout plays, and some of the roster bubble players that we have our eye on going into cut down day, which is next Tuesday. But first off, we'll get into some new developments from training camp this week. Big news yesterday, Dakota. Mike Onwenu back on the field.
Yeah, it's a big one for them. Kind of surprised that it was him that made it back onto the field before Cole Strange, just because we've seen Cole Strange in full uniform a couple of times, standing there watching practice with his teammates. We figured he might return to some participation before Onwenu, who's really just been kind of jogging on the side field. But they were both there yesterday, with Onwenu actually kind of participating and Strange again doing the spectator thing. So Onwenu didn't do any team drills, I don't think, that I saw. He went up to the side field after a little bit. So it was just straightly limited participation, but nevertheless, a huge step in the right direction. Just because I think, and we've talked about this, it's been really bad for the Patriots offensive line this summer, and it could be really bad this season just because of the depth. But if everyone's healthy and they go left to right with Trent Brown, Cole Strange, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, and really whoever at right tackle, I think they could have a really good line and maybe the best one in the division, because that will give them 4 average to above average starters, which not many teams can say, but they got to get those guys on the field, obviously. So Onwenu getting closer to that is a great sign.
Yeah, having 4 of the 5, I think, is something they can work with. I don't think it'll give them the best offensive line in the NFL by any means, but if you have 4/5 of your preferred starters, regardless of what happens at right tackle, which we still don't really know what their plan is there, about a week and a half out from the regular season. But yeah, if you've got Trent Brown, Cole Strange, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, that's a solid foundation to work with, especially since you now have an offensive coordinator that knows how to scheme around one weakness on the offensive line. When you start having 2 weaknesses or 3 weaknesses or more than that, that's where you can run into some real problems. And we still don't quite know whether Onwenu or Strange will be available for the start of the regular season. As you mentioned, neither of them really did much of anything in practice yesterday. We saw a little bit of positional work from Onwenu. He was there in full pads, and he's off the physically unable to perform list, which obviously great signs for the Patriots offensive line, but no competitive work for him, no team drills. There's a chance that it can take him a little while to sort of ramp back up. Remember, this is a guy who practiced yesterday for the first time since last season, since January. And especially if you're an offensive line, if you're a bigger dude, I imagine it takes you a little bit of time to kind of get that game speed back, get that conditioning back, all of those things that are important for O-line play. So still going to be very interesting to monitor his status, Strange's status, and then exactly what they do with Onwenu when he does come back. Do they stick him at right guard? Do they move him over to right tackle, which people have been calling for it seems like 2 years now? They've been hesitant to do that. Maybe they will. Maybe that's part of why they've worked Riley Reiff so much at right guard. We'll have to see. But the fact that there is that progress from somebody who a lot of us were starting to expect or starting to believe might not even be back from the PUP list by week 1, definitely a movement in the right direction.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, it's him getting back into game shape and getting his conditioning up, but it's also, this is a 350-pound man on a surgically repaired ankle. So I mean, it makes sense to give him as much time as he needs because it's a lot of weight on that ankle. I have no idea what that injury was. But so it was probably the right idea to take things extra cautious in the event that's what they did do. But again, I think it is, I believe he was repping with the right guards when we saw him early in practice yesterday. But again, we didn't see him in any team drills, and who knows, the Patriots might just be doing that. So that's what we see. And then they'll do something different next week. But yeah, and we talk about this every year, but I go back to it. What is the line that gives them the best chance to win early in the season? And I don't think you can say that enough early in the season, because I think it is imperative for them to get off to a good start this year. They've started 1-3 or something in the last 2 years. That's a huge hole to dig out of. They have a tough schedule. They got to start fast. And what line gives them the best chance to do that? I think it's Trent Brown, Cole Strange, David Andrews. And then what do you do with those right two spots? Personally, I would do Onwenu at right tackle, and I would give Antonio Mafi a look at right guard. I think, it's been up and down, but I think he's done fairly well in his rookie training camp. It looks like it would be Riley Reif if they do go that route, and that I understand because he's a veteran and he makes those sort of good plays. But I would do it. I know they don't want to, but we'll see, because I think you're a better team with Onwenu at right tackle and a question mark at right guard than you are Onwenu at right guard and a big question mark at right tackle, be that City Zoe, Calvin Anderson, who we haven't seen, Connor McDermott, whoever. But that's just me. I don't think they'll do it, but I think they should.
I agree. I mean, this was my argument most of last season, where the Patriots are just rolling through right tackle after right tackle and nothing was working. You're saying, why don't they just move the guy who played pretty well at right tackle a year or two before? But the fact that they weren't willing to do that at any point last year makes me a little skeptical that they'll be willing to do it now. But I do agree. I do think that's their best all around setup. And quickly to the point about starting fast this season and not getting into one of those early season holes. The team they play in week 1, Philadelphia Eagles, had 70 sacks last season. That was tied for the third most in NFL history. They bring back a lot of those guys up front too. So it's going to be a very steep challenge for the Patriots offensive line, basically right from the jump. And transitioning to that into probably the other big injury availability related news from yesterday was Christian Gonzalez went down with an apparent ankle injury late in practice. He jumped up to try to break up a pass, landed awkwardly, kind of hopped off the field, and was checked out by team trainers for several minutes. He did end up walking to the post-practice huddle, and I believe he walked off the field under his own power. So those were good signs. But for a Patriots cornerback group that already has been without John Jones for about 3 weeks now, just about 3 weeks, to potentially lose your first round draft pick, who is seemingly going to start week 1. It would be a shock if Christian Gonzalez wasn't in that starting lineup in week 1. If you end up being down 2 of your top 3 cornerbacks, potentially even your top 2 cornerbacks, against an Eagles team that has AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and then against a Miami team with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and all of these high end receivers they're going to face early in the season, that's very problematic from a matchup standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, but I'm not that concerned about it, just because I think, again, the fact that he walked out the field yesterday is a great sign. The one I'm worried about is Jonathan Jones. Just because have you seen him on the side field, the rehab field at all? Because I haven't.
Yeah, he's been working up there for a while, but only in sweats. Like, we haven't seen him suited up with pads or anything like that since, what was it, August 3rd, I think was the last time he practiced. It was right before that in-stadium practice.
Yeah, it was the day before the in-stadium practice, and him and a bunch of veterans took that night off, and we kind of just thought it was veteran rest, but we haven't seen him since. And I just think that is a huge factor, because I think you have to anticipate that Christian Gonzalez has some growing pains in the early going to some degree. You don't really know what you're going to get with Jack Jones in certain instances. I think he's a good player, but he's overly aggressive sometimes. You worry about how that'll play against an offense like the Eagles. And then Marcus Jones is good, but he's, we've seen it throughout this entire summer. The size really comes into play against bigger receivers. Jonathan Jones is really their most dependable corner, I think, outside or inside. So I think they need him on the field just to give somebody help if someone's struggling. They can kind of move him around as a chess piece. So that's the one I'm really monitoring going forward.
Yeah, and Jonathan Jones really, other than Miles Bryant, who's only going to play in the slot or at safety, Jonathan Jones is really their only veteran cornerback on this roster. Behind him, you've got Gonzalez, who's a rookie. You've got Jack Jones, second-year pro, also has a court date in about 3 weeks. We don't know if there's going to be any kind of availability issues that stem from that. You got Marcus Jones, who is really at a disadvantage against bigger receivers. We've seen that against Devontae Parker a lot in training camp. You had Isaiah Bolden next on that list, but he's currently in concussion protocol, obviously stemming from everything that happened Saturday night in Green Bay. Then you got a bunch of kind of randos rounding out the depth chart, rather, like Sean Wade, Quandre Mosley, Amir Speed, Rodney Randall. So you take out one piece in Jonathan Jones, and he's not a number one lockdown cornerback, but he's a very important part of this whole cornerback group. So I did see a report from, I think it was from Karen Garigian over at Mass Live, that they do expect Jones to be back for week 1. We'll see if that ends up happening. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest concern for this defense right now. It's, you got to have the bodies in that position group, because I think if they have everybody, they have a pretty good cornerback group. But if you lose one or two, the things can start to crumble pretty quickly.
Yeah, and you do wonder if part of it is just the Patriots this training camp have seemed to be very, very cautious with everybody who's been dealing with an injury. It's really been, not like, hey, if you can play, you need to get out there.
Yeah.
They've given a lot of guys extra time, so you wonder if that is part of it, given how important Jonathan Jones is. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. I both feel really good about the Patriots cornerback group, like better than I have in years from a talent perspective. Really, from Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones, Jack Jones, too many Jones, and Christian Gonzalez. Like, I think they have the talent to be really, really good, but they're young, really young in the case of Christian Gonzalez, and they're small. All of them are really small. So those things do worry me, which is why, I think they need Jonathan Jones. Like, if they go out week 1 against the Eagles, who do you feel best about putting on AJ Brown? Like, for me, that answer is clearly Jonathan Jones. I'd be really worried about putting either Jack Jones or Christian Gonzalez on him. So yeah, I think that they definitely need him out there, because it is a steep drop off from the other guys down to the likes of Sean Wade or what Isaiah Bolden would have been.
Yeah, and I think you need Jonathan Jones for the kind of veteran experience and savvy and all that, and then you need Christian Gonzalez for the height, because he's really the only kind of larger cornerback, larger, rangier cornerback in this group. All right, let's move on to some kind of training camp retrospective type stuff here. Gonna go through each of us 3 studs, 3 ups, 3 standouts, whatever you want to call those, and then 3 duds, 3 losers, 3 players that we were disappointed by this summer. Dak, I'll let you start. Who is your number 1 stud?
Well, I think we both would have had the first number 1 up, so I'll let you handle that one. So instead, I will do Mac Jones. And I'm not just saying that. I think he was really good. Was it perfect? No. But I think what you wanted to see from him this summer, was a few things. One, that he was comfortable and able to run Bill O'Brien's offense, including making checks at the line, the communication with David Andrews. All of that was sort of back to what we saw towards the end of his rookie season and what you would have expected last year, but obviously that we never got. You wanted to see him just sort of take command of the offense and make it clear that this was his team. For all the pre-camp talk about a quarterback competition, and even me, I was like, hey, let's wait and see what happens in joint practices. Let's see if Bailey Zappi gets any run with the starters, with the starting line, with the starting weapons. It never happened. And I think that's because Mac Jones played that well, that much better than Bailey Zappi. I think there was some tough times early while they were trying to figure things out. That red zone work in the first few days was bad, but it got better, I think, every week after that, and really sort of crescendoed in the joint practices last week, especially the second practice against the Packers, which I thought was really a statement performance for Mac Jones and the first team offense. I think he's playing really well. I think he's making a concerted effort to push the ball down the field more. He's made some really good throws. The Patriots haven't connected on a lot of those. I think that's really more of a reflection on their weapons than it is Mac Jones. He's been making really good checks at the line. We saw that with the Ramondre Stevenson run against the Packers the other night. So I think just across the board, It's been a really good camp for Mac Jones, and I think he sort of reestablished that this is his team, and that Bailey Zappi really doesn't factor into the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from camp, because that was one of the biggest questions coming in. Is there going to be any sort of legitimate quarterback competition? Is Mac Jones' job safe? And at this point, it's a resounding yes, his job is safe, and a resounding no, there is no quarterback competition. He will be the Patriots starting quarterback going into the season, and I think it's safe to expect a better year from him than he had last year. He just looks so much more comfortable and confident in this Bill O'Brien offense. I thought you saw a lot of good things from that offense in the preseason game on Saturday night, even though some of the results weren't there. As you mentioned, there were a couple of those deep balls that didn't quite hit. There were some offensive line issues that ended a couple drives, but I think you saw some real steps in the right direction there. And I think Mac Jones is in a much better place right now than he was at the end of last season. That is abundantly clear. My number one stud, as you mentioned, probably your number one stud and everybody's number one stud from camp, Demario Douglas, 6th round rookie wide receiver, really from the jump, from day one of camp, seemed like he was someone who was turning heads. It was basically, I would write these training camp observations after every practice, and I think 95% of them included something about a standout moment from Demario Douglas. I mean, he was seeing work with Mac Jones basically from the start of camp. He was making plays in 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s, especially in 1-on-1s. He was just dominating dudes in 1-on-1s. The fact that the Patriots have barely played him at all in either of the 2 preseason games, definitely a positive sign for his roster standing. This is as clear of a roster lock as you can get as a 6th round rookie. The only concern now is the fact that he's been limited in practice the last couple of days, reportedly suffered a shoulder injury during that preseason game. So we'll see if that's something that lingers and affects his availability at all. He has been at practice and he has been suited up. He just hasn't really done much. He's been working on that side field the last couple of days. So something to monitor there, certainly, but does seem like it's a minor issue. And I expect him to have a role in this Patriots offense this season. I think if I had to predict, it would probably be, I don't know, 10, 12 snaps a game to start, filling in some of those slot situations, maybe some of those gadget type plays that you saw with Marcus Jones last year. But he's a guy that's absolutely on the roster and I think can help them this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think really start to finish, he was the most consistent and consistently impressive receiver. All the other guys really seem to have some peaks and valleys to some extent. But I think he was really good throughout all of it. We'll see. Yeah, the size worries me. It's easy to say, yeah, he can be the next Edelman and he can be the next Amendola, Welker, and I do think he has that kind of skill set, but he is tiny, and so I do worry about that. But so for my number two up, I'm doing Keon White, the rookie 2nd round pick out of Georgia Tech. I think we didn't really know at first. It was a lot of second team defense. I really had questions about whether he was going to play over Dietrich Wise this season, but now I think he has absolutely forced himself into having a real role on this team. And I don't even think this is about the performance of Marte Mapu, but I think there's really been sort of a shift here maybe over the last couple of weeks where I think in that pecking order, Keon White maybe has leapfrogged Marte Mapu just in terms of who I expect the most from immediately. And that's partly because I don't really know what role Mapu is going to have, so it's hard to project. But I thought White was incredible in that game against the Houston Texans. Unfortunately, he got a little banged up on the second joint practice against the Packers, so he didn't play in that second preseason game. But he's just been explosive. He's been really versatile, whether it be standing up and kind of being a traditional edge rusher, putting his hand in the ground. It looks like he could do a lot for this team. So I expect big things from him. He's also he brings a real, nastiness to him. He was really involved in a lot of those skirmishes and some of that chippy stuff with the Packers. He's kind of a quiet guy, but he's really intense. And I think he's got, he kind of fits right into what the Patriots want to be on defense from an identity standpoint, but he also fits in from a versatility standpoint and just providing the kind of explosion and playmaking ability that they really haven't been able to get much from younger players in recent seasons. So I think he's got a chance to be an immediate contributor.
Yeah, he's been a beast. He was awesome in that Houston game. We've seen him show up in a lot of these practices. He's a big dude. He's an intimidating guy. He's athletic. He's versatile. All the things that you mentioned. He's really kind of an ideal Patriots front seven defender in a lot of different ways. It was a shame that he did end up getting banged up during one of those Green Bay joint practices, because I would have liked to have seen how they might have worked him in with the first team defense in that preseason game on Saturday night. We still don't know exactly what his role might be. I would say he probably won't be a starter to open the season, but he'll definitely work his way in some of those rotational packages. But again, with his injury as well, that seems to be relatively minor. He was back to either full participation or close to it yesterday. So it doesn't seem like that's something that's going to linger for him into the regular season. So yeah, certainly a lot to be excited about for him. I think you could even say from an impact standpoint, he might have the biggest impact early in the season of any Patriots rookie. I think Christian Gonzalez is going to be a starter as long as he's healthy and he's going to play a lot. I do think you could see some growing pains there for him, especially with some of the receivers that he's going to have to face early in the year. I think you saw a promising camp from Gonzalez. I think you definitely saw flashes and you saw potential there, but you also saw he was not a lockdown cover man by any means in these practices. So I think it might take him a little bit longer to sort of get his feet under him and become that true number one type guy. Whereas with White, I think you could see him disrupting right from the jump. So my number two stud is another wide receiver, Kendrick Bourne. He's a guy that kind of got off to a slow start in camp. I know we were talking 5-6 days in saying, Kendrick Bourne he's out there, he's involved, but like he isn't really, there isn't really much of a connection there. He wasn't especially productive in a lot of these 11-on-11 drills in practice. But then from the second week of camp on, he's been one of the Patriots' better pass catchers. The connection with Mac Jones seems really strong. You absolutely saw it, excuse me, in the game the other night. He was one of the Patriots' best offensive players in that game, if not their best offensive player. I think you can really, it really seems like he's going to have a year that's much more reminiscent of 2021 than 2022. Because I think you could probably say that outside of Mac Jones, he was one of the players most negatively impacted by the whole Matt Patricia fiasco. So I think there's definite momentum from him to be a much more involved and much more valuable player for them this season. Bill Belichick said he had one of the best off seasons of any Patriots player. He got stronger, put on some weight. He just seems to be in a really good spot right now. And if Mike Gesicki's injury lingers into the season, which now seems unlikely because Gesicki is back on the field after suffering that shoulder injury last week. But the Patriots are going to need the guys a little bit further down their depth chart at receiver to contribute. And I think Bourne is in a very good spot to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's, especially lately, he's really come on. And, to the point where I currently feel better about him than I do JuJuSmith-Schuster.
Yeah.
It just, not just in terms of, overall, just how they've looked from a talent perspective, from an explosion standpoint, but just, I think Mac Jones looks more comfortable with Kendrick Bourne. I think we kind of automatically assumed JuJuSmith-Schuster would take over for Jacoby Myers in terms of the target hog, who is Mac Jones' most trusted receiver. I think that could end up being Kendrick Bourne. We'll see, but I think it's definitely possible. My third up, kind of a sleeper here, Miles Bryant. For whatever reason, Patriots fans love to bag on him.
I hate Miles Bryant. He gets more undue hate, I think, than anybody on the Patriots.
Yeah, and I think it's just from like sort of a fundamental, lack of understanding of how difficult it is to play slot cornerback in the NFL. I think aside from quarterback, you could argue it's the second most difficult position in the game, just with what you have to be concerned about. With these receivers that have option routes, they can go one way or the other. They're typically the shiftiest receivers on the field. It's a tough position, which is why, the fact that Jonathan Jones is able to excel at it, or was able to excel at it for so long, was a huge thing for the Patriots defense. But I think Miles Bryant came out this summer and was just really solid from start to finish. Whether that be playing slot cornerback or sliding in at safety and seeing time in Devin McCourty's old role. I think Jalen Mills will probably get the first shot at that role when the season starts, but not long after that, and maybe just long term. I think Miles Bryant is a sort of sleeper candidate to take over there. I think he's small, but he plays well when he gets looks there. And Bill Belichick recently said or identified him as someone who's taken on more leadership and communication responsibilities with McCourty gone and with Jonathan Jones not being able to play lately. So I think Miles Bryant has had a really good camp. And again, I think also, given the uncertainty with Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, Christian Gonzalez to some level, Jonathan Jones might have to play a lot on the outside again, even though I think ideally he'd be back in the slot. He might have to play outside. And in that case, I think Miles Bryant might have to go back into the slot. And the fact that you have somebody who I think can play at least a solid to above average level at both slot cornerback and safety, I think is hugely beneficial to the Patriots. And I will not stand for any further Miles Bryant slander.
Yeah, strong end to the summer for Bryant too. I thought he looked really good in that preseason game. Had a pass breakup, I think, on third down, and just bowled over a wide receiver who was trying to block him, which was pretty impressive for a guy Bryant's size. I think he's like 5'9", maybe 5'10". He's a small guy. Also had an interception and a pass breakup in one of the practices this week. And with Miles Bryant, he is what he is. He's not going to be a Pro Bowler. He's not an all-star. He's going to make some plays. He's going to give up some catches. But it's a little bizarre to see just how much Patriots fans dislike him. I did a roster projection earlier this week, and people are like, how is Miles Bryant still on this roster? I was like, Miles Bryant is like a stone cold roster lock right now. Like, he is not even close to being on the roster bubble in my estimation. I mean, Bill Belichick loves him. He can play a lot of different roles in the secondary. He's just the kind of player that you need on your team. He's not the guy you would want being a starting outside cornerback or anything like that, but in like in the versatile depth role that he can play, I think he brings a lot of value. And I agree that I think he had a solid overall summer. It was kind of under the radar. You didn't see too much splash from him until these last couple of days, but yeah, he's a guy that's still going to be able to help the Patriots this season.
Just one quick note, I think, I'm not saying he's as good as Jonathan Jones, because I don't think that, but I do think we could look up, like 5 years from now and be like, Miles Bryant is the longest tenured member of the defense at like 31 or 32 years old, kind of like what we're saying with Jonathan Jones right now, both as undrafted free agents or undrafted rookies when they sign with the Patriots. So yeah, like I think he's a roster lock this year, and it would not surprise me at all if he's here in like 5 years too, just because Belichick likes him that much too.
No, my final up is Trent Brown, which is maybe it's kind of by default because he has been on the field, he's been playing at left tackle, and they haven't been able to say the same thing about what they have at right tackle. But after a really kind of inauspicious start to the spring and the summer, we didn't see him at all in OTAs. He skipped all of those. Was a late arrival to minicamp. Then when he got here, he wasn't in shape, wasn't able to practice. I thought he came along pretty slowly at the start of camp. It was a week or so before he was able to get in to team drills and back to full speed. But since then, he's been there every day. He's been in there at left tackle. That's a position that the Patriots obviously needed to. They need to have consistent, reliable play at if their offensive line is going to have any chance of succeeding this season. Obviously, with Brown, it's always there's always the question about injuries. There's always a question about conditioning and things like that. So we'll have to see how it all kind of shakes out over the course of the season. But I would say for the final 2/3 of training camp, the Patriots have gotten what they need from Trent Brown. I think he can. He could have been a little bit better in pass protection in some of these practices. Certainly, he had a penalty in the preseason game, which was a really real issue for them last year. So I don't want to say he was kind of a superstar from training camp, but I think the Patriots probably feel a lot more comfortable with and about Trent Brown now than maybe they did at the end of July when they weren't even really sure whether this is a guy that is going to be kind of on the field and active in week one. I think he's in a much better spot than he was before. And that's a big thing from for the Patriots offensive line. And also too, one quick other point, Adrian Clem says he's taken on a lot more of a leadership type role, especially with the younger offensive linemen, guys like City Sow, who's played a lot with the first team lately. He said Brown has really taken time away from the field to help those guys out, which I think is another good development for the Patriots.
Yeah, I think last season, when writing like preseason top X factor for the Patriots, I think I had Trent Brown in that spot, and I would probably do the same this season if I were to write the same thing. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that like the season could sink or swim on what you get from Trent Brown this year.
Yeah.
The Mac Jones for Mac Jones to do what he does best, and you can say this about every quarterback, but for Mac Jones to really have the time to execute this offense the way it needs to be done, as a guy who's not really a mobile quarterback, he needs protection, and that starts with Trent Brown. And the fact that it is at all trending in a positive direction with him, I think, is a great thing for the Patriots.
So that's the up, that's the positive. Now going to the negative. We're going to rip through these ones a little more quickly. I'll give my 3 down, and then you can give your 3 down. My 3, Tyquan Thornton. It's kind of the same old story with him, just injuries, inconsistency. You saw flashes from him. He had a really great catch in Green Bay. Now he's hurt again. He might not be available for the regular season. And even before that injury, he was trending in the wrong direction in that Patriots receiver room. So I think his roster spot is safe because he's a 3rd round draft or a 2nd round draft pick entering his 2nd year. But certainly not the ascendant year 2 summer that you were expecting from him or hoping for from him. Number 2, Calvin Anderson. It's hard to fault a guy who has an injury or an illness. And in Anderson's case, it's an illness. He hasn't been on the field at all this summer. He's been on the non-football illness list. We don't know exactly what that illness is, when or if he'll be back from it. He has been present at a lot of these practices, but hasn't suited up for any. He's just been an observer. And with all of the kind of upheaval the Patriots have had at right tackle, it seems like there was an opening for him to really grab a spot and grab a role. And the fact that he hasn't been able to be on the field, it's just a missed opportunity. And then the final down for me, it's kind of a dual one. Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong. Patriots gave those 2nd-year backs a pretty long runway to prove that they can be a reliable number 2 behind Ramondre Stevenson. You saw a couple of flashes from each of them in camp. I think both of them are probably in a better spot now than they were last year, but you didn't get the sense with either player that the Patriots really had much more trust in them to be that number 2 and to be a reliable backup for Stevenson, which is obviously why they went out and got Ezekiel Elliott, who is now in that role. And I would be surprised if you saw much offensive playing time for either of those players going into year 2 here. So any quick reactions on that? And then your 3 down.
Yeah, no, I think those were all 3 good choices. Quick on the Tyquan Thornton thing. Yeah, it hasn't looked good. It doesn't look good. The problem is when he's out there, I still think he shows you enough to think that he could be a good player, but he just can't stay out there. And I'm just looking at it right now. The Patriots 2nd round draft pick curse. Now,
not great.
There have been some really good ones. Obviously, like Ballmer looks good. Rob Gronkowski was one. Keon White looks like he could be good. Josh Uche, Eugene Wilson going back to 2023. But man, there are some rough ones too. Tyquan Thornton right now. But then you go back to Jawan Williams, Duke Dawson, Cyrus Jones, Jordan Richards, Jimmy Garoppolo was good, Aaron Dobson, Tavon Wilson, Razai Dowling, Ron Brace, Terrence Wheatley. Like there's some big swings and misses in the 2nd round there for the Patriots. It has not been great. But for me, my 3 down, Riley Reif is a top one for me. He was given the kind of money that made you think he was going to be the starting right tackle, and he was so bad at right tackle that he got replaced by Connor McDermott, who later got replaced by City Zhao, the rookie guard who's been moved over to tackle, and now Connor McDermott also is hurt, so that's a sidebar. But I think Riley Reif has really, really struggled. Doesn't look like he has much left in the tank. He's now getting run at right guard. I don't know if that's because they're thinking of putting him there and putting in one at right tackle, or they're just trying to find a spot for a guy that they gave real money to. That does not look good. I think he's kind of unplayable right now. Number 2 for me, JuJuSmith-Schuster. I don't think he's been bad, but he just hasn't jumped off the field in any of these practices, figuratively. I mean, he has literally jumped at times, but I have not come out of really any practice thinking that's their best receiver. That's Mac Jones' number one target. That is a one-for-one replacement for Jacoby Myers, if not better, which is what you were hoping to see. Maybe it's just, when the bright lights come on, he's going to be, he's going to sort of lock in there and take that step. But I just didn't see it much this summer. And really just a lot of the plays he made were just, sort of these crossers or slants or just short stuff underneath. Not anything that would make you think he's going to be a downfield threat. I think he could be a really good red zone player for the Patriots, but really that's it. Like I don't know. I'm starting to have real doubts about what kind of player he's going to be for them this season. We'll see. And number 3 for me, Jake Andrews. There was the Patriots' first pick in the 4th round, the first one after Gonzalez, White, and Mapu. Was drafted as a center, but can also play guard. There was some early talk and sort of chatter reports from some credible reporters out there who were wondering if had sort of talked to executives around the AFC that were thinking they wondered what David Andrews' future was in New England after drafting Jake Andrews, if Jake Andrews could come in and start as a rookie just like David Andrews did as an undrafted rookie all those years ago. That's not going to happen. David Andrews might have actually been the best player in camp, but I always leave him off the list for whatever reason. But Jake Andrews didn't really get any significant run at either guard spot with the top offense. Certainly didn't see any time at center. Just not really a viable option at any of those 3 spots right now, which is a disappointment considering he was drafted over Antonio Mafi, over Sidi Zhao, who have gotten real opportunities this offseason. So, it hasn't been bad, but he just doesn't look ready, which is a disappointment. And he also looks small. It's one thing we've sort of all talked about. You look at him and you're like, I don't know if he's an NFL offensive lineman just yet. So he's kind of been a down for me as well.
Yeah, Jake Andrews strikes me as a ideal kind of Foxborough flu candidate because you're probably not going to cut a player that you just drafted in the 4th round, but you haven't really seen anything from him that makes you think that he can even be the James Ferentz this season. He's gotten next to no work with that starting unit, with that top offensive line. And his impact has been significantly lower, I would say, than either of the other 2 offensive linemen, or either of the other 2 rookie offensive linemen, rather, Antonio Mafi and Sidi Zhao. Neither of those players have been perfect by any means. They've certainly had their growing pains, but both of them have seen a lot more opportunities and I think have contributed a lot more so far. So it's tough to keep 3 rookie O linemen on the roster or on the 53-man roster when one of them probably isn't going to play at all. Which makes me think that you may see a mysterious calf injury for Jake Andrews, ends up landing on injured reserve before cut down day, and then kind of try again next year. But there's probably going to be some interesting roster finagling to fit some of those guys on.
I think. Go
for it.
I was going to say, I think you made a good point about James Ferentz, because I think when Jake Andrews was drafted, my first thought was, okay, like he needs to replace James Ferentz, who's been a solid player here during his time with the Patriots as sort of the top backup center, but also someone who can slot in at guard every now and then. I think like Jake Andrews, if nothing else, should have filled that role. And I think even though James Ferentz hasn't been that great either, Jake Andrews definitely isn't ready for that role, which is disappointing.
And Cody Russi has been hurt for the last week or so too. He was another one of those top kind of interior center guard backups. And even with him out, hasn't really led to any sort of increase in Jake Andrews' opportunities. So certainly not the ideal start for the 4th round draft pick. Closing this out, top play from the summer. We got to watch 18 practices, or I got to watch 16. You got to watch 18. There were a lot of them. What's the one that stands out to you? The most impressive play you saw from a Patriots player in training camp?
Yeah, the number one play for me, and it was really sort of a culmination of everything, was the 50-yard touchdown to Devontae Parker last Thursday in Green Bay. It was really all about the setting. It was a really chippy practice, a lot of trash talk between the Patriots and the Packers, just great entertainment. And it had been a really, like I said earlier, like a statement day for the Patriots offense. And they punctuated it in perfect fashion. Before the play started, Jair Alexander ran over to sort of get lined up on the side of the field where the Patriots sideline was. He's jawing back and forth with Jabril Peppers a lot. They were really going at it to the point that Mike Pellegrino told everybody on the sideline to cut it out. And then seconds later, Mac Jones hits an in-stride Devontae Parker for a 50-yard touchdown. Not against Alexander. I think it was Rasul Douglas who was in coverage. The Patriots sideline emptied into the end zone, really went nuts. Mac Jones was kind of losing his mind at midfield. Jabril Peppers was talking a bunch of trash. And it was just a great play all around. From the emotion standpoint, just a great way to end what was a great practice and a good week for the Patriots. And also just great to see the Patriots connect on a big play. And a summer that was really a lot about, it seemed, like they would get there, but they were doing a lot of the short stuff, a lot of the underneath things, like baby steps, kind of building to that. And that week they hit on a lot of bigger plays, with that one sort of the top one. And so I think that was just for really all those reasons, it was the play that stood out to me the most this summer.
I still have some lingering FOMO from not being at those Packers joint practices. It sounded like a lot of fun out there.
I don't know if there's a video of it out there, because there were videos from other plays. Did you see a video?
I haven't seen that one. No, I saw some of the fight videos. I saw it was like Kendrick Bourne against Jair Alexander, I think, but I haven't seen one of that big touchdown, which sounded like quite the scene out there in Green Bay. For me, it was one of the many kind of acrobatic red zone touchdowns the Patriots had in this camp. It's funny thinking back to the start of camp, the defense was just absolutely dominating them in the red zone. The Patriots weren't able to get anything done when they moved inside the 15, 20-yard line, which was really the focus early in camp. But as the summer went along, you saw a lot more success for the offense in those areas, which I think bodes well for them this season, considering they were so bad in the red zone last year. But the one that stood out to me, I think it was on August 7th, I want to say August 7th or 8th. So a week or two into training camp, Mike Gesicki went up in the back of the end zone. I think there were 3 defenders right around him, and he made a one-handed catch that was almost like a one-armed catch. He basically put his hand up, and it just lodged right in his, right inside of his elbow, pulled it down in the back of the end zone. Big cheers from the offense, all of that. I don't think you saw quite enough of those plays from Mike Gesicki before he got hurt. You did see a couple of splash plays like that. I think he was maybe didn't make quite as much of an impact as people were hoping for in this first training camp, but that catch was certainly something special.
Yeah, it was. And, I actually think that's, that is relevant, because I don't even know if we mentioned him earlier, but, Mike Gesicki dealing with that shoulder injury, which when we heard about it and it was reported as a minor shoulder dislocation, my antenna went up and thought that feels like the classic Celtic spin, where they're like, yeah, it's not a big deal, but it is, and he's going to be out a while.
It was reported that they hope he's going to be back for week 1, and whenever you hear hope, you're like, that's probably like a week 4 or 5 kind of thing.
Yeah, and and I think it's especially relevant for a player like him. Like, I don't think it would have been a tough injury for even Hunter Henry, but the way Hunter Henry plays, I think he could have managed it. But with Mike Gesicki, he's the more athletic of the two. He's kind of going out making catches like that. He makes a lot of sort of splash plays, one-handed catches, things like that. And if he was going to be limited and not able to do that, I think that would have been kind of a big deal. But the fact that he was back out there this week in the red non-contact jersey, I think was a really good sign for him, because I think with what the Patriots and Bill O'Brien want to do on offense, I think he could be a big part of it. And just the way he plays, like making that kind of catch that you mentioned, a shoulder injury could have prevented some of that, but it looks like he's going in the right direction.
Yeah, you saw some decent range of motion too from him once he came back. Didn't get a ton of competitive work in these last 2 practices, but you saw him reaching up above his head to grab some passes up there. He looked pretty fluid, looked like he was moving well. Didn't seem to be any visible kind of after effects from that shoulder injury, other than the fact that he was out there in a red non-contact jersey. So to close out here, Patriots have one last preseason game, again, Friday night in Tennessee against the Titans. Cut down day is Tuesday at 4 p.m. The Patriots currently have 89 players on their roster at the time of this recording. They need to get down to 53. You will see plenty of roster maneuvering beyond that. Their initial 53-man roster almost certainly won't be the roster they have in week 1, but they do have a lot of decisions to make before that. And so to close out here, we're going to spotlight some roster bubble players that we're most interested in either watching in this final game or kind of hearing where they land on which side of the cut line. I'll start with two of the bigger name rookies in this class. That's Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver out of LSU, and Malik Cunningham, quarterback / wide receiver out of Louisville. Boutte is somebody that I think has really bolstered his roster case over the last week or two. He had the 42-yard touchdown against the Packers that everybody saw in the preseason game. And then this week in practice with Demario Douglas limited and not taking part in these practices, and with Tyquan Thornton also out and Trey Nixon also out, I think you saw a very much increased role for Kayshon Boutte. He was just a lot more involved in the passing game. I had him down for 9 targets across those 2 practices, caught all 9 of them. The majority of those did come from Bailey Zappi, but still the fact that he was as involved as he's been all summer at kind of a crucial time going into cutdown day, I think he's put himself in a pretty good spot, especially if the Thornton injury is something that's going to linger into the season, which it now sounds like it might. You could see the Patriots keep Tyquan Thornton, move him to IR after cutdown day, and then have Boutte be that number 5 receiver. And then with Malik Cunningham, it's an interesting case because we saw him get a lot of work at receiver, especially in that preseason game. He did not look good at receiver. He is not anywhere close to being a NFL caliber wideout. That's going to take a lot longer if he ever does even get there. But he has proven this summer that he can provide value as that kind of change of pace quarterback, the gadget play quarterback. Patriots have never really had somebody like that on their roster, but they do seem to like Malik Cunningham, and it wouldn't be shocking if they kept him on top of Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi to have as that kind of maybe give him a couple of snaps here and there, maybe just use him as a kind of guy to simulate Jalen Hurts and other mobile quarterbacks in practice. But those are 2 of the most interesting guys I'm looking for going into this week.
Yeah, I think those are good picks. One thing I'm fairly certain of, maybe he lands on IR with a shoulder injury, Tyquan Thornton. But if he does not land on IR and he is healthy and ready to go, Tyquan Thornton's not getting cut. I know that was a very popular opinion this week after the Kayshon Boutte TD, which to me was more about the Packers defense than Kayshon Boutte. But regardless of what we think about Tyquan Thornton, and I do think it's trending toward bust, you don't give up on a 2nd-round pick after his 2nd training camp, especially someone who, brings something that they don't have on offense, which is speed. So I think he's on this team one way or the other. And yeah, we'll see about Malik Cunningham. That's going to be a fascinating one because I don't know if he's shown enough in any role that he's been in the summer to make me think he actually could be good at any of them. But the athleticism is undeniable. And again, that Patriots don't have a lot of athletes like that on offense. So might be an intriguing developmental option for sure.
I think he hasn't shown a ton at either spot, but I do think that it's going to be more of a, we don't want to lose this guy kind of thing. I think that's going to be the main crux of that debate, because you could see a team like Baltimore, who has Lamar Jackson at quarterback, who also played at Louisville, who knows Malik Cunningham. If he gets cut, he can tell John Harbaugh to be like, hey, I know this guy. He's going to be good for us. Bring him in. He can be a developmental guy. Ends up getting claimed off waivers by the Ravens, and the Patriots can't work with him again. So it's going to be a calculus of how, like a risk calculus. How much do they want to, how important is it for them to continue working with him? And does that warrant a spot on the roster?
Yeah. And I think similar things could be said about Kayshon Boutte as well.
Yeah, true.
So for me, I got a couple really quick ones that I won't spend much time on. Josh Bledsoe, someone who, I thought at different points maybe could be in line to be a successor to Devin McCourty if everything broke right. What was he, 5th or 6th round a couple of years ago? I forget.
6th round, yeah.
6th round, yeah. And I think you've seen a lot of good versatility out of him. But I just, the numbers are what the numbers are. They're loaded at safety. I don't know if there's a spot for him. Maybe they get lucky and get him back in the practice squad. Sam Roberts, I think someone who has a lot of traits and ability to be an interesting piece on the defensive line. I know he had those 2 penalties the other night, but he was a draft pick last year, and I think there are times he really pops, and I think he looked good in that Houston game too, where I think he actually could develop into a decent player. But what's the math like on defensive line, especially now with Keon White in the fold? And also Isaiah Bolden. I just, he might land on IR. He might, we'll have to see how serious the concussion is. Is it something that's going to be like, a month-long thing or a few weeks, or is it one of those where, yeah, it looked really bad a week ago, but he's actually back in a week or two? If that's the case, if he is back to practice, I think there's I think there's a chance he makes the team. I think he was tracking to making the team, but he certainly was on the bubble. So I just think whatever happens with him, I think will be interesting to see. But then the two ones that I really wanted to spend time on, number one, talked about him earlier, Riley Reef. I don't think we don't talk about him like he's on the roster bubble, but I think you could definitely make a case that he should not be on this team. That he has not played his way into a role. I do think that them trying him out of guard is them just sort of shooting darts, trying to find a way to justify the money. Because what is it, $4 million guaranteed for him?
I think so. Yeah. Let me check that while you're talking. Yeah.
I think it's like $4 million guaranteed. I mean, that's real money. And so that would require Bill Belichick acknowledging that he made a mistake, which isn't something that he probably wants to do. But I do think if we're looking at surprise cut candidates, that wouldn't surprise me, but maybe would surprise other people. He'd be in that one for me.
Yeah, just over 4 million, 4.12 million guaranteed.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for a guy who I think really is borderline unplayable, at least with the way he's been in training camp.
I think it's a lot of money, but it's also a lot of money to cut a guy.
It is.
If you're that guaranteed money is going to be paid regardless. I think there's more of a chance that Connor McDermott gets cut than Riley Reef, because he's got less.
He's better though.
But he was at right tackle for most of training camp, and then they tried to play him on the left side against Houston. Really struggled. Then he basically got demoted behind City Sow, and now he's hurt, and we haven't seen him on the field in the last week or so. So, I did a roster projection this week. I had both of them on. But I just think from a financial perspective, it's tough to. Reef has not looked especially good, but to be like, all right, we're going to eat $4 million guaranteed. That's a tough pill to swallow.
I suppose it also sort of depends on what happens with Calvin Anderson. That he's kind of a big variable in this. But that we're even talking about Connor McDermott and Riley Reef, and that it is a relevant talking point, sort of underscores the reality of how bad things are on the right side right now for the Patriots.
It's still it's going to be a valid second guess, and it already is being second guessed. The part of the Patriots offseason where they looked at their roster, they said, all right, clearly our biggest need is at right tackle, which is what a lot of people could have said coming out to last season. I think that was their weakest spot. They're like, we're going to fill it with a couple of mid-level free agent signings in Anderson and Reef, both of whom were backups to start last season. And then the only tackle we're going to draft is a guard who hasn't played tackle since 2018. They didn't put themselves in a very good spot at that position. I don't know what their ideal, the ideal outcome of that was. Is Riley Reef comes in and just looks awesome, which he really hasn't in several years. And he's 34 years old now, going to be 35 this season. The fact that they weren't willing to spend on one of those bigger name, bigger money free agents or use an earlier round draft pick on a tackle. If things continue to look not great on the offensive line, you're going to be able to very clearly look back and say, it seems like you guys had a chance to fix this and you just kind of chose not to.
Yeah. And it's weird. It's like, you'll never see them shortchange themselves at a key position on defense, right?
Yeah.
Like they'll always be prepared there, but for some reason on offense, whether it be receiver or right tackle, like they seem to be fine with just embracing the chaos. I mean, when's the last time they had? I feel like we've been singing this song at right tackle for years now, really ever since Vollmer, right? Unless depending what you think of Marcus Cannon, but it's kind of been a revolving door of not good for a while.
Yeah, Marcus Cannon was really good in one of those Super Bowl seasons. I think it was 2018, maybe. But yeah, ever since then, they just haven't been able to find a reliable guy to stick there. It seems like
Newhouse.
Yeah, I would be interested to go back and look how many players have started at right tackle for the Patriots over the last 4 or 5 years. It has to be 10, 12. Last year it was 4 alone. And yeah, it just seems like a position that they have continuously tried and failed with kind of mid-level solutions that just haven't worked.
Yeah, it's like the offense's version of the other inside linebacker or
Yeah.
like outside linebacker. Like they just keep, I don't know. But the other one I wanted to mention is the punters, the punter talk. And I think you could maybe have the same sort of conversation on the with the kickers, with the rookie kicker Chad Ryland and Nick Folk. Neither of them seem to want to win this job. They both have been pretty inconsistent. But on the punters, like I've started to wonder in the last week or so if there's a scenario in which Bill Belichick actually rosters 2 punters, or even if he doesn't do that, if Bryce Behringer makes the team, the rookie, and then Corliss Waitman is elevated from the practice squad the first few weeks, because Behringer had a much better game against the Packers than he had really he had struggled in practices and everything leading up to that for about a week or two. So it was great to see that out of him. But he's been really up and down during camp. And then lately, whenever they do sort of the positional punts, the coffin corner kicks, when you're like punting from like the 49 and you need to put it right down there in the goal line, like they've been giving all those first looks to Waitman in practice, which tells me that they just, really trust him on those more than Behringer. I mean, when they're punting from like, their own 20, he's the one getting those and he can really boom them. But again, a lot of like the coffin corner work has been going to Corliss Waitman. So part of me wonders, like, is there a world in which they do keep both punters, which would just feel like insane to me, especially when I consider like, I think it's possible they also keep both kickers. Like if in a year in which it's become perfectly clear that special teams doesn't matter much anymore and that it's heading toward extinction, if the Patriots roster 4 specialists, I mean, I would just kind of throw up my hands. But I think all those scenarios are in play. And I think the punter one is kind of sneaky fascinating.
It is. I think that there's a better chance that, like, in my view, Behringer has a better chance of winning the job outright than Ryland does at this point. Even though he was drafted 2 rounds later, I think on the whole, he's been more impressive than Corliss Waitman. There are still definitely the concerns about his directional punting and some of those like short field ones. But Ryland, his leg is definitely stronger than Nick Folk's. He's shown that. But Bill Belichick has had, I mean, the Patriots have been so fortunate at kicker for 25 years now. Basically, outside of a couple like 6-month stretches, they basically went straight from Adam Vinatieri to Stephen Gostkowski to Nick Folk, who's been very good for the last 3+ years. If they don't believe Ryland can be reliable enough now from an accuracy standpoint, I don't know if they're going to feel comfortable enough saying, okay, you're our kicker, we'll figure it out. We'll let you kind of work through whatever you need to work through and we'll make it work. Especially when you have a guy in Nick Folk who, even last year, he was good. He wasn't awesome. I think he showed a couple of signs of decline, but he was still pretty good. It wouldn't be shocking if they kept 2 punters, 2 kickers rather, maybe not on the 53-man roster. Maybe you can convince Nick Folk to sign for the practice squad, being like, hey, we're going to elevate you for a couple of games. They did that a couple of years ago when they had Quinn Nordine. I would say it's a little disappointing that Ryland wasn't able to come out and just blow him out of the water and say, oh, okay, this is why you drafted this guy, traded up to draft this guy in the 4th round. And he hasn't been bad, but I think the margin between him and Folk is probably closer than the Patriots wish it was at this point. And then, the punter thing's going to be fascinating as well. It depends on how much they value that kind of directional ability. And also Corliss Waitman he's not a guy that's been a prolific punter in the NFL for years and years and years. He's kind of a journeyman guy who's bounced around to a couple teams recently. So
led the league in punt attempts last year. Does not very good.
Led the league in punt attempts, but right. That was just because he played on the Denver Broncos.
In football.
Yeah.
He kicked for the worst.
It's gonna be fascinating. I mean, I am expecting the unexpected, I guess, when it comes to both of these roster decisions. I think most teams, it would be kind of cut and dry. You say, okay, we're going to keep the rookies. We drafted them. We're just going to roll with them and see how it works. But I don't know, with how much value Bill Belichick places on special teams, it wouldn't be shocking if 3 or potentially even all 4 of those guys hang around in some capacity.
Yeah. And I think part of it might just come down to the roster math or just, what they think they can do with the practice squad because, we're living in a world in which Chad Ryland has not just clearly won the job. So it is absolutely a debate. And so the Patriots, I think, have to think, well, we want Chad Ryland here next year or this season. We drafted him. He's got to be here. We traded up for him. We have to have him here. But, can we cut him and sneak him onto the practice squad and sort of extend this development a few weeks? Or do we cut Nick Folk, who, maybe they could, Nick Folk would play ball with them. Maybe they have that sort of agreement. I don't know. But, if you're Nick Folk at this stage of your career, and given the way kicking is around the NFL, there aren't a lot of good kickers. The Dallas Cowboys, he's from Texas, I believe. They need a kicker. If the Patriots cut Nick Folk, if I'm him, I'd probably want to go try and find a real kicking job, right? I'm not just going to go to the practice squad. So I think that's a risk. So they have to sort of weigh that. I don't know.
I mean, you saw the exact same thing with Brian Hoyer a couple of years ago. The Patriots cut him saying, all right, cool, we'll keep you on the practice squad or we'll re-sign you to the roster after we move someone to IR. And then Hoyer gets a couple $1 million offer from Indianapolis and he says, oh, nope, I'm going to go do this instead. Sorry, guys, but deal with it. So,
then all of a sudden you're stuck with a rookie kicker who missed 3 in a row wide left in practice a couple of days ago. So, and again, the margin for I think the Patriots will be a lot better this season than they were last season, at least from an on-field standpoint. We'll see about the record, but I think they're still going to be in this sort of space where, they got to win on the margins and that there's not going to be much room for error. They can't afford a lot of the special teams issues they had last year or the penalties. And part of that, of course, is you got to have a kicker who can convert on extra points and field goals. And if he can't do that, or if Bill Belichick has serious doubts, I think all options are on the table.
Again, cut down day is next Tuesday at 4 p.m. The Patriots have one preseason game to go before that Friday night against the Tennessee Titans at 8:15 Eastern. That will do it for this week's episode of the NESN Patriots podcast. You can follow me on X, I guess now. You can follow me on X at Zach Cox NESN. You can follow Dakota at Dak Randall. And you can follow along, of course, with all of our Patriots coverage leading up to and straight through cut down day on NESN.com.